Hello and welcome to Future Squared. Stephen Hawking once said that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, so let's adapt. My name is Steve Glaveski, and each week I'll bring you conversations with preeminent thought leaders from a variety of fields to help you think in a multidisciplinary way, kick goals in your professional and personal life, and better navigate what is fast becoming a brave new world. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation accelerator that works with organizations to unlock their people's latent potential to create more impact for humanity and lead more fulfilling lives. If you need help driving your organization's innovation strategy, visit collectivecampus.io. And without further ado,
come with me if you want to live.
In today's age, it can be hard to find the time to sit down and learn more, especially if you've not yet turned off your push notifications like I've been telling you to. You might hear some of my author interviews and think, wow, I'd love to read that book, but with so many great books out there, you don't have the time to read them all. Well, there's one app I highly recommend, and it's called Blinkist. Blinkist takes the best key takeaways and need-to-know info from thousands of non-fiction books and condenses them down into just 15-minute reads. That's 900 seconds. Prefer to listen to books? Blinkist has you covered. As an advocate of short feedback loops, I like Blinkist because I can learn and apply key concepts to my business and life faster, which means I get results faster. I use Blinkist when I'm in the gym, pounding the pavement, and commuting. I've listened to books like Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari and Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman on Blinkist. Two books you should most definitely check out. Right now, for a limited time, Blinkist has a special offer just for Future Squared listeners. Go to blinkist.com/futuresquared to start your free 7-day trial. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist. Blinkist.com/futuresquared to start your free 7-day trial. Blinkist.com/futuresquared. And now for today's guest.
It's not what we think is of value about our product or service. It's not what we think they should think is of value. It's what they believe is of value. So you can work as hard as you want, and that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. And you can do everything that you should be doing in order to build a successful business. But if you're not able to communicate the value that you bring to someone and how it will affect them, how it will touch their lives, you're just going to go nowhere fast.
Welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 356 with Bob Burg. Burg is a sought-after speaker at company leadership and sales conferences, sharing the platform with everyone from today's business leaders and broadcast personalities to even a former US president. Burg is the author of a number of books on sales, marketing, and influence, with total book sales of well over 1 million copies. His book, The Go-Giver, co-authored with John David Mann, itself has sold over 850,000 copies, and it has been translated into 28 languages. Burg is an advocate, supporter, and defender of the free market and free enterprise system, believing that the amount of money one makes is directly proportional to how many people they serve. He's also an unapologetic animal fanatic, and is a past member of the board of directors of Furry Friends Adoption Clinic and Ranch in his town of Jupiter, Florida. We unpacked the following in this conversation. 1. The 5 laws of the Go-Giver Way. Value, compensation, influence, receptivity, and authenticity, and how applying them can benefit you in both business and life. 2. Why it's not what you sell, but the value it delivers that matters the most, and why that value need not always be direct or monetary, but it must always be effectively communicated. And 3, how to get past objections and determine not the objections, but the conditions you need to satisfy to sell your product. We also touched on cognitive biases and how to get better at mastering them, the left-right political divide, and how to better persuade people to your line of thinking. With that, please enjoy my conversation with the one and only Bob Burg. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Great to be with you.
You're joining me all the way from outer space in Jupiter, Florida.
Absolutely.
Are you a lifelong Florida man, or?
No, I actually grew up in Massachusetts, but got down to Florida as fast as I could. The weather's a lot warmer down here.
I'm sure it is. But growing up in Massachusetts, would that make you a Boston Celtics fan?
Well, I was. I grew up, Red Sox, Patriots, Bruins, Celtics. Those were the big four. Yeah. But since I came down to Florida about a little more than 30 years ago, I really switched my allegiance over to South Florida. So I'm definitely a Miami Marlins and Dolphins and
Heat fan.
And so I and Panthers, that's our hockey team. So I don't really follow hockey and basketball anymore like I used to. Loved it growing up, but now I'm more of just a baseball and football.
Yeah. Well, from what I understand of Bostonians, it's sacrilege not to support the local team, but I think 30 years in Florida is enough to give you a pass.
I think so.
So, Bob, I'd like to know, how do you define your mission in life?
Oh, well, my mission in life, I always, feel a little funny answering that, only because there's only so many different ones that you can hear and they all start sounding alike.
Yeah.
But, mine is to certainly make a positive difference in the world. My specific way is by helping people feel genuinely good about themselves and helping them to learn how to communicate in a way that is persuasive and helps them attain the results they want while making other people feel good about themselves.
Yeah. And I love that. And you've essentially been working in this space now for over, 30 years. You set up
just about
Burg Communications, established 1990. So what kind of work have you been doing with Burg Communications then?
Well, I started out speaking mostly on business networking and creating a referral-based business. And this was back, in the day that networking wasn't the term that it is now, where everybody just knows it. So there were maybe 3 or 4 of us back then who were really teaching that topic. And my purpose in terms of teaching networking was to show salespeople, entrepreneurs, and so forth how to develop the relationships in the marketplace. A lot of times people who felt really good about what they did, they were the technicians, if you will, right? They loved their product or service. They knew all about it, and they understood the value they brought. But when it came to going out and selling and building the relationships, that was tough for them. So really, my first book, Endless Referrals, Network Your Everyday Contacts into Sales, which came out in the early 90s, that was all about creating those know, like, and trust relationships. So that was really what I did mainly for about 15 or so years. And then once we came up with the Go-Giver series of books, my co-author John David Mann and I, it sort of took us in a bit of a different direction.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, before we get into the Go-Giver direction, even nowadays we see that show up with people who are technically proficient. Perhaps they could be, say, product web or web developers building some kind of a software as a service platform, and they're all into the technical side. But when it comes to actually communicating the value proposition and effectively selling said product to the market, that's when things tend to fall over.
Sure. And look at professionals such as lawyers and accountants and people who they are great at what they do. They're fantastic. The practitioner aspect, they're wonderful. Yet they don't realize that part of what that lawyer needs to be doing is selling legal services or selling accounting services. And, it's the same with the person selling insurance or printing or graphic design or the dentist or what have you. We need to be able to create and establish and build relationships with people so that they feel good about us. They know, like, and trust us. They want to refer us to others. They want to be our personal walking ambassadors. Yeah.
And essentially selling what those accounting services or legal services will actually do for someone above and beyond the functional title of those roles.
Exactly.
So, Bob, nowadays we have this hustle culture online, hashtag hustle. Everybody says, be an entrepreneur, work late, get up early, put in the hard yards. But oftentimes people can do that, and they can do that for years on end and ultimately not seem to get anywhere closer to their goals. Why might that be the case?
Well, if that is the case, then they're not communicating value to the marketplace in a way that the market accepts. Okay, and this is key because when we talk about value, and the first law from the Go-Giver is the law of value, and often people don't understand the difference between price and value, right? So price is a dollar figure. It's a dollar amount. It's finite. It is what it is. What is value, though? Well, value is the relative worth or desirability of a thing, of something, to the end user or beholder. In other words, what is it about this thing, right? This product, service, concept, idea that brings so much worth or value to someone that they will willingly exchange their money for it and be glad that they did, ecstatic that they did. But here's what we always have to understand. Value is always in the eyes of the beholder. It's not what we think is of value about our product or service. It's not what we think they should think is of value. It's what they believe is of value. So you can work as hard as you want, and that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. And you can do everything that you should be doing in order to build a successful business. But if you're not able to communicate the value that you bring to someone and how it will affect them, how it will touch their lives, you're just going to go nowhere fast.
Yeah. And essentially it's about telling a story around not what you do, but what it will do for the other person. So if you're selling, say, if you're an AdWords consultant and you're helping people get clicks for Google searches, then essentially you might say, well, my service costs $2,000 and that's the price. But really the value is you're going to generate an extra $50,000 in business for the customer. And that's really what you should be communicating. Well, that's the story you should be telling.
Yeah. So the question is, how do you best communicate that? And it typically is by asking questions and then listening, right? It sounds so simple, right? But here's really, when you think about it, what is selling? And I personally, not that my definition is the correct one or any more correct than anyone else's, but I personally define selling as simply discovering what the other person wants, needs, or desires and helping them to get it. So the only way we can discover, by the very nature of the thing, the only way to discover is by asking questions. And one reason that people don't do this as much is because as human beings, we all come from our own set of beliefs, the way we see the world. This is very unconscious by nature. But as human beings, we also think that the way we see the world is basically the same way everyone else sees the world. And that's intuitive. I mean, how could it be any different, right? It's all we know. And so and this goes back to what I alluded to earlier, what we think someone would find fascinating or terrific or fantastic about our product or service and what it will do isn't necessarily what they're thinking. So the only way we can know is by asking questions and then listening, but not listening with our ears. That's that surface listening that we do. It's that listening in order while we're waiting our turn to speak. Right. It's letting them have their 2 cents worth so that we can get in our 10 cents worth. It's typically not very effective because we're really not trying to understand them. We're just waiting for our turn to speak. So we would say, listen with your eyes, listen with your posture, listen with the back of your neck. And as silly as that sounds, what we really mean is put your entire being into listening to this person, simply in order to really understand, and then ask questions based on their answers, because they may provide an answer and we assume that answer means X when really it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on quite a few important points there. I mean, particularly the fact that our reality is subjective and what we think in the moment is going to be different to what someone else thinks. They're bringing a whole different set of life experiences, cognitive biases, interests, predispositions, all sorts of stuff. And for them, they may not have timing on their side. They may not have appetite. It may be whatever you're selling may solve a problem for them, but they're probably happy with how they solve that problem already. And what they say and what they do are often two different things. And I think it's Chris Ross who wrote a book called, the name escapes me. I know I'll add that to the show notes for our listeners, but essentially about the counterfeit yes, when people have this innate desire to just please the other person. So you might be in that meeting and you'll be trying to sell your value proposition, and that person, that prospect, will tell you how great it is, but ultimately when you try and follow up after the meeting, you never hear back from them again.
Right, exactly.
And you've talked about this in one of your sales books, Go Givers Sell More, where you talk about going from essentially objections to conditions. What's that all about?
Well, there's a difference in terms of an objection being more the person perhaps not understanding why the value of the product or service is higher than the price itself. When you think about it, what really is an objection? At the end, when that person says they have to think about it, or they can't afford it, or they have to talk to so-and-so, really what they're saying is the value that I perceive in this product or service is lower than the price I'm being asked to pay. And by the way, price isn't always just money. Price we could say cost, right? The different costs. There's price, there's financial cost, there's time cost, there's aggravation cost, there's lost opportunity cost. So what they're really saying is the value is here and the price or cost is above that. Okay. So that's often, those are objections. And what we need to do is not try and overcome the objections. You can't overcome an objection because that's going to happen is a clash of egos at that point. Overcome comes from the same Latin root as convincere, which means to conquer, right? Nobody wants to be conquered. So what we would say is you cannot overcome an objection. What you can do is you can work effectively within the objection. You work with the prospective customer in order to discover really what the real objection is, as opposed to what they told you, which is probably just the manifestation of the true objection, which they may not even know. Now, a condition is different. A condition is, they really don't have the money. I mean, if you're selling something for $10,000, that's a luxury, and they just don't have the money for it, and they shouldn't purchase it, and they couldn't anyway, even if they wanted to. Well, that's a condition, and so or if they need it in delivery of this widget in 10 days, and you can't get it to them for 2 months, that's a condition. It has nothing to do with the trust, or quality of the product, or your relationship. It's a condition. It's just not going to happen. And wisdom is oftentimes knowing the difference.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as they say, every no gets you closer to a yes, and it's about having a healthy relationship with that no, and rather than taking it personally, determining what the objection was and how do you get around that objection and turn that into, satisfying the condition that this person has, if you can satisfy it at all. Because like you said, in some cases, you're selling something worth $10,000 and that person doesn't have that kind of money to spend on a widget that they don't really need. And
exactly.
And just on the determining the value versus the cost. One thing worth just doubling down on there is also the fact that it's not just the price paid, but like you said, it could be the switching costs of switching from one product to another.
Absolutely.
The internal.
and
the internal resource allocation costs, because you're still going to potentially have to allocate people's time internally to figure this product out, train people, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. Costs are not just financial. There are many other costs aside from financial.
Yeah, fantastic. So, Bob, nowadays it seems like almost everyone, well, at least if you go online onto Twitter and Instagram, wants to be an influencer. Some succeed, but many fail. How do we go about building influence, which I know is the second law in the Go Giveaway?
Well, the term influencer has sort of taken on a life of its own as a person online that will, I guess, represent products or services because of the influence they have with others. Right. Right. And so that's certainly someone who can do that. It has influence, but that's not necessarily the whole picture. Right. Now, here's the funny thing. We've always had professional influencers. When you've watched the television and the athlete was selling a product or service. Well, they're an athlete. They're an influencer. You don't really necessarily think that athlete knows about that widget, right? I mean, they're just representing it. There was in Robert Cialdini's great book, his series Influence, Science and Practice. He talked about an actress. We have a very, very well-known actress of yesteryear, Angela Lansbury, who she was very good. Murder, She Wrote, right? And before that, she was a stage actor. She was fantastic. But so for a long time, she was the spokesperson for an aspirin company. Okay, now really, do we think Angela Lansbury knows all about that aspirin and why it works? No, it's because we love Angela Lansbury.
Yeah,
she has influence. So when we see Angela Lansbury talking about aspirin, we love Angela. So we're going to buy the aspirin, maybe. So you know what I'm saying? So there's always been influencers. It's just now online. It's sort of created that opportunity for people in certain niches to be that person, to be that celebrity spokesperson. So that's certainly one aspect. Now, when we look at influence and what it is on a very, very basic level, influence is simply the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, usually within the context of a specific goal. That's by definition, that's influence, whether we're talking about sales or leadership or in social circles, friendships, what have you. So that's the definition, but that's not really the essence of influence. The essence of influence is pull. It's pull. It's an attraction. You never hear people say, wow, that David or that Mary, she is so influential. She has a lot of push with people, right? She sure is pushy. Wow, what? She's so influential. No, they'd say she has a lot of pull. She's very influential.
Yes.
And there's a big difference.
Oh,
there's
yes.
a big difference.
Huge difference. And I think also it's a matter of noting that it's not just about what monetary value you might create for the other person. I've got a definition here, how abundantly you place other people's interests first, but also what do they value as human beings, and how can you use that influence or that value creation to build that influence rather. For example, someone might value status, and perhaps by leveraging your product or service, it will make them, kick some goals at their organization and help them get that promotion, perhaps, rather than just, price versus cost or something to that effect.
Well, you make a great point. So let's delve into that a little bit, because that's fantastic. A great influencer is always going to ask themselves questions to make sure their focus is in the right place, which is on the other person. So in other words, they'll ask themselves, how does what I'm about to ask this person to do? And again, whether it's someone on their team, whether it's a customer, whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend, what have you, how does what I'm about to ask this person to do, how does it align with their goals, their wants, their needs, their desires? How does what I want this other person to do, how does it align with their values? And to the degree that we ask ourselves these questions thoughtfully and intelligently, authentically, genuinely, not as a way to manipulate another human being into doing our will, but as a way of building everyone in the process, that's the degree to which we've earned their commitment to our ideas, as opposed to trying to depend on some type of compliance or manipulation, or, you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, 100%. Actually, it reminds me of a case study from Sony in Japan, whereby senior management wanted to invest some time into an innovation program, which was separate to the core business. So middle managers weren't really incentivized to support it. But one middle manager did. And this middle manager was promptly commended with a letter of commendation, rather, from the president of Sony. And this news was spread far and wide. And Japan being quite a hierarchical society where there is this respect for the top of the organization, other middle managers were, voluntarily giving up some of their best staff to participate in this program because they also wanted that letter of commendation. So coming back to your point, like, what do people value, and honing in on that in order to get the desired behavior that you're looking for?
Exactly. Yep. Right on.
Fantastic. So the third law of the Go Giveaway, Bob, is essentially about compensation. And one of my favorite quotes of all time comes from Zig Ziglar, which was, if you want to make $1 billion, help 1 billion people, which is essentially the essence of the law of compensation.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and of course, Zig's famous saying is you can have everything in life you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want.
Yes.
And so where law number one is about providing immense value to others, aside from just the intrinsic value of your product or service, providing the experience that just, makes them feel like $1 million, makes them feel great about doing business with you. Law number two, or the law of compensation says your income is determined by how many people you serve and how well you serve them. So this law says that to the degree that you are able to impact the lives of many, many, many people, that's the degree that you will be financially rewarded. And of course, that's why referrals are such an important aspect, referrals and introductions and recommendations, because with referred prospects, it's easier to get in front of that person, right? You're going in on borrowed influence. With a referred prospect, you can sell on price is less of an issue with a referred prospect, again, because of borrowed influence, borrowed trust. So it doesn't mean it's a non-issue, but it's less of an issue. So you can sell on high value as opposed to low price. With a referred prospect, it's easier to complete the transaction or close the sale, whatever you want to call it, based on borrowed trust or what we call vicarious experience. So while this person hasn't done business with you personally, someone who they know, like, and trust has said, hey, this is the person who you need to go with. This is the person who's going to take good care of you. This is the person who has a great product or service, and they back it up, and they're right. And then the fourth benefit of a referred prospect is that this person is already of the mindset that that's how you do business, because that's how they met you.
Yeah.
So in their world, you are a referral-based sales professional.
And that's why I often, I'm just completely blown away, not in a good way, when I come across entrepreneurs who are doing reasonably well. They've got a few big clients on board, and then I'll jump onto their website, and there'll be absolutely no indication of social proof whatsoever, no client testimonials, no case studies. And I basically asked them, hey guys, why aren't you worked with Microsoft, why isn't that on your website? Oh, we haven't got time to do that. And then they struggle to close additional sales. But that's like one of the best things they could be doing to build that, Absolutely. Like you said, to get that borrowed trust on board.
Absolutely.
Is it worth making a distinction, Bob, when we talk about compensation and it being a reflection of how many people you serve, but also how much value? Because you may serve only 5 people, but create a hell of a lot of value for them. If I'm to channel, the Pareto principle, which shows that you can get 80% of your value, or 80% of your revenue rather, from 20% of your customers. Is that worth making that distinction there?
Sure, but it just depends on the business too.
Yes.
Basically, we would say that, remember, law number one is about the exceptional value you provide. That's the bedrock. You've got to do that. You have got to provide immense value through your product, service, and the experience itself. The law of compensation takes it to the level that says, hey, it's not enough to just serve one person, right? You've got to still impact many people's lives. Now, if you're selling $10 million airplanes, you don't have to serve a whole lot of people to make a lot of money, right? But for most of us in business, we need to have certainly a significant amount of people we're serving. Yeah. And by the way, you might be serving lots of people directly or indirectly, right? But it tends to work out that the more people whose lives you touch with the exceptional value you provide, just by the very definition of the thing, the more money, the more income you're going to earn. Yeah.
And if you're selling apps in the App Store for $1 a pop, well, then you're going to need to serve a whole lot of people.
Exactly. Yes.
Fantastic. So you've said that the key to effective giving, Bob, is essentially to stay open to receiving. Why is being open to receiving a key to this?
Well, because the world around us, and this certainly, has given us not mixed messages about money and abundance. It has given us such negative, horrible messages about money. Most people today, they just, if you listen to so many, you think that the people who get wealthy did it on the backs of others or by taking advantage of others, and of course it's a big world out there. So there are people who do that. And of course, that makes the news. Okay. I don't know about in Australia, but here in the States, I'll tell you a headline that does not sell. Corporate CEO treats everyone wonderfully.
Yeah.
Okay. Salesperson, totally honest and ethical. That it just doesn't sell.
No.
And so what happens is people grow up and they read the stories about, in our country, we had Enron and Tyco, and we just had the problem with the bank that was pushing fake accounts on people. And of course, in Germany, Volkswagen falsified their emission findings. But how often, when you think about it, does that really happen? In terms of, to the degree that we have a free market based economy, and when I say free market, I simply mean no one is forced to do business with anyone else. They do so on their own volition, right? To the degree we have a free market, the only way you can make a lot of money is by serving a lot of people and serving them wonderfully well. Because let's look at it this way. Nobody's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet. They're not going to buy from you because you need the money, and they're not even going to buy from you because you're a nice person. They're going to buy from you because they believe that ultimately they will be better off by doing so than by not doing so. And that's the way it should be. It's the only reason someone should buy from you or from me or from anyone, because we're making their life better as a result. And this is why John David Mann, my co-author, and I say that money is simply an echo of value. Okay. So people, because we get these horrible messages about money, people often grow up and it's unconscious. It's not something we know. It's just that we see it all the time in terms of the messages we're given. So they think, oh, if I make money, that's going to make me an evil person, right? If I make a lot of money, it must mean I did something bad. If I make a lot of money, it means I took advantage, right? Which is baloney, but that's, it gets inside people's heads. So that's why we say, all the giving in the world is the giving of value, fantastic, but it's all for naught if you don't make yourself open to receiving, just like breathing out and breathing in. Breathing out's great, but you've also got to be able to breathe in or you're not going to survive for too long. So that's why I'm constantly, even myself, and I'm a pretty, abundant thinking person, but I'm always reading blogs on abundance. Randy Gage's prosperity blog I read every day. David Nagel's the Millions Within, and I'm always reading and listening to abundance and prosperity books and CDs, and because we've got the garbage comes to us naturally. Yeah, we've got to make the effort to be and think in prosperity.
110%. Couldn't agree with you more on that one. And it's something that I've been conscious of over the last 5 years at least, whereby I'm I'm on a strict diet when it comes to mainstream media, because like you said, 90 to 95% of what we see in the news is just, it's very negative leaning. And I guess it's pandering to the human negativity bias. It is. Because we're going to latch onto that sort of stuff. And one thing you also touched on, which I think is worth calling out, is a lot of people think that wealthy people built it on the back of someone else. And I know you're a massive free enterprise advocate, and as am I. I think more often than not, when people are successful, not in all cases, but more often than not, it's because they've actually put in the hard yards.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
But nowadays, I guess in the US in particular, it's happening in Australia and several European countries, we've got this divisiveness between the far left and the rest, essentially. And oftentimes it's a matter of individualism versus collectivism. And,
absolutely. Absolutely.
And, the internet, again, jump onto Twitter, lots of negativity. It can ultimately polarize people and harden them to their pre-existing belief systems. But without discourse, we don't move forward. And something you've talked about is that in order to persuade people we need to see the other side first as human beings.
Yeah, it used to be, and you make a great point, because it used to be with political discourse, not that it was ever pleasant or friendly, but it used to be, I'm right, you're wrong. Okay. Now it's, I'm right, you're evil.
Yeah.
And that's a significant difference, because if you believe that the other person is evil, you will not engage them. Why would you engage with evil? They're incorrigible. There's no way to, right? And so we first have to look at people. And here's the thing. By and large, those on the left and those on the right, and then, of course, there are always the outliers that really do want bad for others, but not most people. Most people on the left and on the right, they want, and this is in Australia, it's in the States, it's in Canada, it's in Europe, they want for people to be able to be happy, to pursue happiness, to live in abundance, to be able to, but they have different ways of getting there. And they really, really believe that their way is right and the other is just so totally wrong, and that it's not only wrong, but they have evil intent behind it. And most don't. Most are good, well-meaning people. So first, what we need to do is see them as human beings. Then we need to actually understand their viewpoint. Now, that does not mean agree with it. That doesn't mean agree with it. But we've got to understand why they think the way they do, why they feel the way they do. Because if we don't take the time to at least understand it, there's no way to effectively persuade them. How could we? We don't even understand the premise they're coming from. So first, understand and be willing to listen and ask them to share with you why they feel this way and how do you feel that would work and what do you see the positive and negative aspect. They'll tell you. They want to tell you. And you can begin to agree, and you build that relationship. You build that know, like, and trust. And that's when persuasion can begin to happen. But it's not going to be from telling someone you're wrong or you're evil or you want to see the world burn or what have you. They're going to shut right down. What are they going to say? You tell them they're evil and they're going to say, oh, thank you for sharing that with me. I hadn't thought about it that way before. But, now that you bring it up, you're right. I'm going to change my thought process. Yeah. No, of course not.
Exactly. And again, it comes back to that negativity bias. 95% of people are probably somewhere in the middle and just happy to live, a happy life. And what you see on the interwebs is essentially the fringes.
Exactly.
Just like your restaurant reviews, there's
right.
Any popular restaurant, chances are there's been tens of thousands of people that have eaten there, if not hundreds of thousands. But you jump onto the Yelp reviews and there's maybe several hundred people, and it's usually the people that just had an absolutely amazing experience who just want to jump on and share it, or the people that had an absolutely lousy experience and can't wait to be vindictive online. Exactly. Everyone else eats their meal, pays their bill, and moves on.
You put it just beautifully. That's absolutely so true.
And lucky last, Bob, authenticity. This is a great one because I recently had an opportunity to speak with Jonathan Rosenberg, who co-wrote $1 Trillion Coach with Eric Schmidt of Google, which is about Bill Campbell, who mentored the likes of, or who coached the likes of Steve Jobs, Eric Schmidt, Mark Zuckerberg. Not sure if that was a good thing or not, but nonetheless, a lot of big influencers in the Silicon Valley tech space. And one thing he said was, when you're vulnerable, when you're authentic, people will open up to you. Employees will open up. You'll have transparent conversations, and you'll be able to move forward in an environment that's devoid, for the most part, of politics. But how do you propose we go about becoming more authentic, and what is the value you see, Bob?
Well, I think that authenticity is something you are, but we can always work on improving ourselves, and we never have to use authenticity as an excuse to stay where we are. It's sort of like the person who says, well, I have anger issues and I yell at people a lot. And if I was to act any other way, that wouldn't be authentic. Oh, that's baloney. That's hogwash. It only means this person has an authentic problem that, they need to authentically work on and improve upon in order to become a more effective, authentic version of themselves. So, in the story, in the Go-Giver, Deborah Davenport, one of the mentors, said that the most valuable gift you have to offer is yourself, and that all the skills in the world, the sales skills, technical skills, people skills, as important as they are, and they are all very, very important, but they're all for naught if you don't come at it from your true authentic core. But when you do, right, when you, as we like to say, show up as yourself, day after day, week after week, month after month, people feel good about you. They feel comfortable with you. They feel safe with you. They're much more likely to want to be in relationship with you, to do business with you, to refer you to others. But I think one challenge people have is that they maybe don't have the confidence in themselves to show up authentically. And let's face it, it's hard to show up authentically when you don't really believe you have anything to show up authentically for. So why is that? Well, because again, as human beings, we see ourselves often in a way that, we see the warts, right? We see and we also see what we do as nothing special because we assume if we do it, everyone can do it. That's also why people undercharge, why they devalue themselves a lot. I believe as human beings, we have two types of value. We have intrinsic value, which is just by being a human being, we bring value to the table. But we also have what I call market value. And I define market value as that combination of strengths, traits, talents, and characteristics that allows a person to bring value or give value to the marketplace in such a way they will be financially compensated for it. So it's important, but it's hard to see it sometimes because, again, we're too close to ourselves. We're too emotionally involved. How often have you coached someone where the person told you what they were doing? You said, "Oh, that's fantastic. That's terrific." And they said, "Oh, no, everyone can do that." Right? Everyone does that.
Yeah.
Well, and they weren't being falsely modest. It's just who they are. It's what they do. They don't see it as any big deal. And so I think one way we can really lead with our best authentic selves is to understand our strengths. And to embrace our strengths. And sometimes we can do it through introspection. Sometimes we do it through a mentor or a coach. Sometimes we do it, a variety of ways. But it's very, very important we come to understand our strengths. Now, we also need to know our weaknesses, of course. But there are some weaknesses that we can ignore because they're not important, right? I don't run very fast, but being 61 years old, not looking to win a 100-yard or 100-meter dash, I don't care. Okay. There are weaknesses we have to mitigate. I'm naturally not very good with numbers. So as I got into business, I had to learn some accounting. And even though I didn't have to, I hired accountants, I still needed to know enough, right, that I could mitigate that weakness. Then there are the weaknesses that we need to actually turn into strengths. That would be that angry person who needs to become less angry and more appreciative. But we lead with our strengths. And to do that, we have to understand what they are, and we need to embrace them. Then we can really lead with our true, authentic core.
Yeah. And I think that will also help people get out of imposter syndrome when they find themselves in positions of influence or status in an organization, which a lot of leaders fall into. But being more aware of your strengths will obviously help you get out of that. What am I better at than other people that is of value, that this organization values? Just ask yourself that question, or at least reflect on that. Before we wrap up, I want to be conscious of your time, Bob, but you talked about weaknesses there. And I think one weakness that we are all subject to is the many biological predispositions and cognitive biases that are hardwired in us thanks to tens of thousands of years of evolutionary programming, which oftentimes can set us astray. Biases that helped us survive on the African savanna when we were looking to evade predators and catch our prey may have served the purpose then, but nowadays potentially they can sabotage us. So you wrote a blog post recently about silencing or mastering the drunk driver of your mind. How can we go about doing that, Bob?
Well, awareness is always just first.
Yes.
We need to be aware. And that's the thing about cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias. We're not aware of it. And often when we suffer from the two, they're actually confirmation bias is part of cognitive dissonance, but I kind of think of them as two different things in a way because they manifest themselves a little bit differently. But we can be suffering from confirmation bias, and if someone says, you're having confirmation bias. We deny it, right? It's part of confirmation bias. So we have to be aware of it. I read a brilliant book. It was written about 10 years ago, and they updated it, and I kept hearing about it, and I never bought the book, and I finally did last year, and it is the best book ever on the topic of cognitive dissonance. It's called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. And it was absolutely brilliant. The authors are Tavris and Aronson. And it was, I would recommend everyone read that book. It will teach you things about yourself and about others, and how to deal with the confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance of others as well as ourselves. And it will keep you from making some, not you, but I mean, it will keep one, it will keep the reader from making bad mistakes.
Fantastic.
It was absolutely brilliant. That's a book I recommend to everyone now.
Perfect. Well, I'll add that to the show notes for our listeners. Bob, thank you so much for your time. This has been a fantastic conversation. If people want to learn more about you and your work, they can obviously head over to thegogiver.com. You also run a weekly Facebook Live every Thursday, Eastern time, that is. And they can find you on Twitter at Bob Burg. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up?
No, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Boy, you asked great questions. You made the time just fly by. And I always love speaking with my mates from the land down under. And I just wish everybody a fantastic day and much continued success.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. And I hope you can head out today and get some sun for me, because it is freezing cold today, about 8 degrees Celsius. So enjoy that Florida weather.
All righty.
Cheers, Bob. Hi, guys. Steve again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that I'm publishing on a regular basis, just leave your details at futuresquared.xyz/subscribe and you'll receive the very next one. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, take a minute to like, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It goes a long way to giving the podcast the exposure it needs, so I can continue bringing you guests and conversations of the highest caliber. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Gliveski and on Instagram at TheSteveGliveski. Until next time.
Hasta la vista, baby.